Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ranti Rhomantika with student ID number 211011096. I will read the Economist article, page 17, the economic weapon. Sanctions on Russia are like none the world has seen. Will they work? Ban Russia from SWIFT. Russia favored SWIFT. The placard on display at demonstrations across Europe during the last weekend in February were a sign of the times. In place of the straightforward demands of yesterday, like arrest the South African workers and perennially ban the bomb, many of the messages focused on access to the digital messaging system used by financial institutions for cross-border payments, economic measures to cut Russia off from the world's financial arteries are the most powerful implements a West unwilling to meet a nuclear adversary on the battlefield has dared wield in response to the invasion of Ukraine. But it has wielded them savagely. No major economy in the modern world has ever been hit so hard by such weapons. The use of sanctions, which Nicholas Mulder, a historian, calls one of liberal internationalism's most enduring innovations, in his new book on the subject. The economic weapons has boomed over the past few decades. Since 2000, the number of individuals and entities of America's sanctions list has risen more than tenfold to 10,000. Former governments keen to punish military aggression or human rights abuses, but reluctant to go to war over them, have embraced the tactic. As with other weapons, a number of innovations have been developed to target them more precisely. Governments have also on occasion applied sanctions with what was intended to be overwhelming force. Dedication to the war against Vladimir Putin's regime will show but what they can achieve and possibly how big their intended cost can be. The rest goes not to the SWIFT. Though Western sanctions started off a bit feebly, Italy insisted of a carve or for luxury goods in the European Union's less well-held muscophiles go without their Gucci. Public opinion and Ukraine's inspirational resistance quickly saw them towed up. After debating whatever to make it much harder for Russian banks to process international payments by shutting them out of SWIFT, some European countries feared it would hurt their own banks. To Western allies agreed to try getting 7 of them, though it has steered clear of Cyberbank, Russia's largest buyer assets, which plays a big role in processing energy payments. America has gone further, cutting off Sberbank and VTB, Russia's second largest lender, from its financial system. The most potent financial sanctions took have been aimed not at Russia's commercial banks, but at its central bank. In the 8 years since annexing Crimea made Russia the target of a first wave of sanctions. Mr. Putin's regime has built up reserve they now total $630 billion, and shifted their composition away from dollars to help insulate the economy from further punishment. But reserves become moot, whatever the currency in which they are held, if they cannot be used. America, acting with Europe, has banned a range of parties from transactions with Russia's central bank on pain of enormous fines that will cripple Russia's ability to defend its currency. The West has also frozen most of the bank's assets outside Russia. The suppressed financial professionals, including apparently in Moscow, according to an European central banker. The way the Russian central bank had been accumulating and distributing reserves suggested it did not believe the West would take such draconian measures. Within hours of the sanctions taking effect, the central bank raised its main interest rate from 9.5% to 20% in an attempt to shore up the currency. With other companies with foreign currency revenues to convert most of them into rubles, and told Russian banks to reject instructions by foreign clients to liquidate Russian securities. Mr. Putin later banned anyone from taking more than $10,000 in foreign currency out of the country. This financial barrage was accompanied by slower burning sanctions. Export control will limit the components Russia can buy for its military and high-tech sectors, denying its goodies ranging from cutting-edge machinery to microchips. The measures apply not just to goods made in America, but to those containing American technology that are made and shipped from third countries, such as China. President Joe Biden said these controls could cut off more than half of Russia's high-tech imports. For now, consumers goods dear to ordinary Russians, like smartphones and home appliances, are exempted from such measures, presumably to allow room for escalation. But Apple is no longer selling iPhones or other kits in Russia. It is one of a fast-growing number of Western companies getting out business sections. BP, Equinor, and Shell, through all measures, announced plans to extricate themselves from their Russian ventures. Maersk ship will no longer visit Russian ports. Nike is stopping online sales. Failure to staunch. The most significant of these moves is by BP, which would give up a 20% stake in Rosneft, an oil company run by a closely of Mr. Putin's Russia responded to its plans and those of others seeking to divest themselves of such encumbrance by announcing a temporary ban of foreign firms selling Russian assets to ensure they were guided by economists, not political pressure, selling its stake in Rosneft. Glenn, with BP right down up to $25 billion. Nobody thinks sanctions alone can force Mr. Putin to sound their retreat. The government that have imposed them nevertheless hope the punishment and isolation they inflict, and the possible deterrent effects on others at least justify them. Measuring sanctions success is hard, not least because of the difficulty of disentangling their effect from other economic and on occasion military forces, but there have been few outright successes. Perhaps the quickest, took some time ago, was America's threat to dump sterling bonds and block Britain's access to IMF credit during the Suez crisis in 1856. The Anglo-French invasion of Egypt was abandoned weeks later. A more recent success was the squeeze on Libya by America and allies in the 1990 and early 2000s. A mix of sanctions and financial inducements persuaded Muammar Gaddafi to end his WMD program and stop funding terrorism. The apparent failures of sanctions are many. Sometimes this because they are fundamentally symbolic or weakened by interest groups in the countries imposing them. So the point of sanctions is to exploit asymmetries, doing much more harm to the adversary than to yourself. There are always burdens to be borne by some. There is also a loss of the economy as a whole. The cost of compliance with sanctions for banks and companies has skyrocketed over the past decade. Financial institutions alone spent over $50 billion worldwide in 2020 on screening clients for sanctions risk. According to LexisNexis, a data firm, but several sanctions have failed to. Though strong sanctions brought Iran to the nuclear negotiating table in 2015, even stronger maximum pressure sanctions later imposed by America have neither dislodged the mullah who ran to country nor stopped its meddling in the region. American-led sanctions against Venezuela for years and Cuba for decades have failed to change their regimes or even force them to change their ways. One thing which weakens sanctions is weakness. Despite America's maximum pressure measure, the Islamic Republic manages to export an estimated 1 million barrels of oil per day as middlemen find ways to disguise the origin of shipments. Self-selling lollipops. And the more powerful sanctions are, the greater the risk of collateral damage, particularly when targeted regimes are indifferent to the suffering of citizens. Indeed, increasing the harms done can work, at least in part, in the government's favor. In Venezuela, a significant number of those opposed to President Nicolas Maduro and his henchmen also opposed the American sanctions, putatively aimed at dislodging them. And widespread suffering can erode support for sanctions in the countries imposing them. Sanctions can also pass countries they target into each other's arms. Russia and China hit with American sanctions over its mistreatment of Uyghurs as well as its suspected tech spying, are enjoying their friends' lives. Relation for decades. Russia was already by far the biggest beneficiary of Chinese overseas lending and assistance between 2000 and 2017, receiving up to $151 billion, according to its data. Research group. China could supply Russia with semiconductors and hardware for telecoms, network and data centers, as Western suppliers pull away. Though China cannot yet produce the most advanced chips, that highlights one of the ways the sanctions sword is double-edged. It encourages those who fear them to develop alternative financial and technological infrastructures. This is not easily done, as the continuing vulnerability of Russia's central bank and the weakness of its tech sector show China is pushing hard in that direction, as well as trying to boost its chip making. It is creating its own version of SWIFT called CHIPS, which simplifies cross-border payment in yuan and developing a digital currency. The sight of Russia's central bank being hit so hard by sanctions, no one expected will doubtless increase its effort to establish the yuan as a reserve currency. It will also seek ways to protect its $3 trillion of reserves by trying to move them beyond America's financial reach. It has a long way to go. The usage of the yuan as a currency for international payments is at an all-time high. At just over 2% of the total, it still pales besides the dollar at 40%. Even so, potential moves towards independence from the American-dominated system still pose a dilemma for the West. If wielding the economic weapon prompt possible target to accelerate measures aimed at protecting themselves, the weapon's potency will weaken over time. Not wielding it, though, mean you might as well not have it. That said, forbearance might have systemic benefit. Mr. Mudder's book argues that when world trade is stagnating, aggressive sanctions can do serious damage to it. And measures used between the first two world wars, he argues, end up undermining the already precursors political foundations of the era's international trade. The same could happen again. As the world economy reels from financial crisis, nationalism, trade wars, and a global pandemic, sanctions are aggravating existing tension within globalization. The sanctions are intended to promote international stability is unfortunately no defense against these risks. The more immediate question facing America and its allies is how much further to go and when. The European Union could broaden its SWIFT ban. All banks with operations in America and Europe, regardless of where they are based, could be forced to cease transactions with Russian financial institutions. The West could also step up efforts to follow the offshore money trails linked to Mr. Putin and his circle. America, the European Union, and Britain said this week that they will set up a task force to improve syncretic operation on identifying and seizing Kremlin-linked assets, though such efforts typically take years. The most obvious way to inflict more economic pain would be to target the oil and gas exports that are Russia's biggest source of foreign currency. The scale of the cost that would impose in Europe, though, makes such a measure a true double-edged sword. If Russia calculates that the cost on Europe is too high for it, where it might short of the export itself. And pushing up the price of petrol in an election year, as such measures would be a brave move on the part of the Biden administration. Brent crude has jumped above $110 a barrel, over 20 higher than just before the invasion. When used in earnest, sanctions can inflict heavy economic costs on both sides on top of the deprivation inflicted in targeted countries. Even then, they do not always work. There is perhaps only one constituency which can be relied on to do well out of them. The head of the sanctions team at a large American law firm says it has moved to a 24/7 operation over the past week to allow it to pass new, often unprecedented regulations and advise companies in every sector imaginable. It seems entirely possible that as the world of sanctions continues its evolution, the hard-grafting lawyers will have yet more salad days to come. That is all, and thank you.